The title of the initiative, which is what appears on the petitions that are currently circulating for signature and would appear on the ballot if sufficient signatures are circulated. This title was set by the title board at a rehearing back in January, and the title provides that it's an amendment to the Colorado Constitution concerning a right to local self-government. So that's what the title board identified as the single subject, is the right to local self-government. And then goes on to, as stated in the slide, declaring the people's inalienable right to local self-government in counties and municipalities, including powers to enact laws to establish, protect, and secure rights of natural persons, communities, and nature, and the power to define or eliminate rights and powers of corporations or business entities, etc., and exempting such local laws from preemption or nullification by federal, state, or international law if the local laws do not restrict fundamental rights or weaken legal protections for natural persons, their local communities, or nature. So if the signatures are determined to be sufficient, that's one of the questions that would appear on the ballot this fall. The Colorado Supreme Court reviewed an appeal from this title setting and affirmed it without an opinion back in March. So signatures have been, or petitions have been circulating for signatures since then. We filed a motion for rehearing on behalf of Doug Kemper and the Water Congress, and that's what led to the rehearing in January. We participated in the rehearing and got some clarifying changes to that title language that's before you now. The Water Congress elected not to participate in the appeal that was filed by American Petroleum Institute and Colorado Petroleum Association. So let me talk for a few minutes about legal implications of Initiative 40. First of all, it establishes a right of the people to local self-government. It's a right of the people, not of the governing bodies, and could be construed to expand rights of initiative at the local level. Initiative 40 would change the preemption structure between state and local governments. Currently, local laws are subject to state preemption in certain circumstances, and local governments to some extent are instrumentalities of the state. But Initiative 40 would essentially reverse that and make state laws subject to local preemption in many ways. In his opinion on a similar provision in Initiative 89 2 years ago, Justice Hobbs characterized this kind of paradigm shift as a tectonic shift in the relationship between the state and local governments. Initiative 40 also alters the rights of business entities, allowing local governments to take away rights of businesses that operate in their communities. Initiative 40 empowers communities to recognize and establish rights of natural persons, their local communities, and nature, but it does not define these rights. Particularly the concept of rights of nature is something that's not defined in this initiative, nor is it otherwise defined in the Colorado Constitution. So conceivably, this concept of rights of nature is something that could be left to each community to define for itself. And then the initiative allows local communities to enact laws and prohibitions and also any other means deemed necessary to secure those rights. And it conceivably could allow some local governments, such as counties, to regulate or prohibit other local communities' water supply activities in order to protect rights of the source community and rights of nature. Now, at the title board rehearing in January, the attorney for the proponents denied that that was their intent, but the language of the amendment itself is broad enough that it potentially could allow it. Colorado's local government laws distinguish between activities of state concern, activities of local concern, or activities of mixed state and local concern. Municipal and industrial water supply development is defined as an activity of state interest subject to limited local regulation under the standards of House Bill 1041, which I think many of you have seen in practice. With Initiative 40, the local prohibitions would no longer be subject to those state standards, but would be exempt from state preemption as long as the local laws do not restrict fundamental rights of natural persons, local communities, or nature. So that's really the legal analysis from the text of Initiative 40 that led to the concern about how's this going to affect the rights of counties to limit or prohibit other communities coming in and taking water from those counties. Finally, on the question of local control, the latest word from the Colorado Supreme Court is a decision earlier this month on laws of preemption in the City of Longmont versus Colorado Oil and Gas Association. The court held that Longmont's ban on fracking was preempted by state law. The court went through the preemption and conflict analysis and clarified what that analysis is about, but found that the Longmont's ban operationally conflicts with applicable state law, and therefore it is preempted. Toward the end of the opinion, the court also addressed the question of the current Bill of Rights in the Colorado Constitution and held that the inalienable rights provision in Colorado's Bill of Rights did not limit state preemption of local government laws because there's nothing like this Initiative 40 in the current Colorado Bill of Rights. The court also went on to distinguish Colorado law from the Pennsylvania Constitution's Environmental Rights Amendment, which the Colorado court characterized as a relatively rare provision, noting that there's no legal authority in Colorado, according to the Colorado Supreme Court, which they've now said repeatedly, there's no Colorado legal authority that recognizes a public trust doctrine. You may wonder why the reference to Pennsylvania, and several recent Colorado ballot initiatives have taken after Pennsylvania's recent legal developments in the areas of environmental rights and local control, largely due to a 2013 decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in a case called Robinson Township. In that case, the Pennsylvania court overturned a state law preempting local regulations of oil and gas, and the court's decision was based on the Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights in the Pennsylvania Constitution. The Colorado Supreme Court pointed out that Colorado doesn't have anything like this. It's not in our Bill of Rights, and we do not have a public trust doctrine in Colorado. Initiative 40 is very broad on local government powers, but it is not a public trust initiative. We've seen other public trust initiatives in recent years, but not this one and not this year. There's also Initiative 63 that you may hear about, which is also currently approved for petition circulation in Colorado. It is an environmental rights amendment with some similarities to Pennsylvania, but it is not a public trust initiative either. However, both of those initiatives, Initiative 40 and 63, would empower local environment regulations in some of the same ways that Pennsylvania has done, grounded in its public trust doctrine. Well, I understand we'll have time for questions at the end of the program, and I'll turn it over to Stan now to present an industry perspective.
Thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon. I want to thank the Colorado Water Congress and Doug and Emily for convening this. Our association, the Colorado Petroleum Association, thinks it's very important that voters in Colorado are informed about the various initiatives that are being, petitions that are being circulated to support those initiatives, and hopefully people have a chance to review the contents of this initiative prior to signing the petition to put this on the ballot. And so we really appreciate the Water Congress providing that forum. I'm not speaking to you as an issue committee, which is defined by the Fair Campaign Practice Act. I'm just providing our analysis from the association along with other organizations. I think the bottom line here is that this is an initiative that is providing a ban of any corporate activity in the state of Colorado, usually implemented by a local government. And I don't think that the opponents would disagree with that. And in fact, the materials I'm going to present to you today are directly come from the website and the statements of the proponent initiatives. So this idea of a community rights amendment, this is a project that has been taken to a number of other states, and the proponents recognized that this is a national movement. They've been trying this initiative in several other states, and They actually, in their presentation materials, quote the the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico, who declared this initiative or initiatives like it as being, this issue is the beginning of a social movement that is greater than the oil and gas industry. It is a potential game changer for corporate America. And that was stated by the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. And that's a statement that one of the ballot proponents, Cliff Wellman, completely agrees with. And so I think that lays out the framework for the purpose of the amendment. And that is obviously to enact local laws to protect health, safety, and welfare. It certainly attacks the issue of preemption. Preemption is an issue with several cases that have been decided by the Colorado Supreme Court just recently in the oil and gas area, but as well as in the mining area with the Summit County case. That has fueled the proponents' belief that this kind of an initiative is necessary. As Steve was describing the initiative, you can see that it's a direct attack on the structure of corporations and their ability to do business in the state of Colorado or other states in which these initiatives are brought forward. It disregards the separation of power. It's direct democracy. It says, notwithstanding what the courts say, notwithstanding what other entities say, direct democracy applies here. And the proponents note that not very many local governments think this is a great idea, because local governments obviously have that challenge of balancing a variety of interests in their community as they set the path forward for their community. The proponents really talk about rights-based law. These are defined, unalienable rights: the right to clean air and water, the right to prevent chemical trespass, peaceably enjoy our homes, right to local self-government, and the proponents claim these rights already exist in the Colorado Constitution. And I'll leave it to Steve and other legal scholars to work through that, but I think that's a broad brush approach that one would want to evaluate before making a statement like that. Who's covered by this initiative? Well, obviously, the proponents are primarily thinking about oil and gas, and certainly the Supreme Court cases that were decided just a little less than a month ago certainly fuel the interest in this initiative. But this also covers community-based minimum wages. In Colorado, currently, there is a state approach to setting a minimum wage, and that prohibits the enactment of local minimum wages. And by the way, all of these examples are coming directly from the opponents, so I'm not just making these up. Or did I come up with the terms in of the way that our strong agricultural sector is described as by the proponents? They call that factory farms, chemical use, mining, and they certainly cite the Summit County case in which I think it was heap leach gold mining was banned, whether it was being conducted or not. Sewage dumping, I think there's another term for that those in the water community or water providers might have a perspective on. Genetically modified organisms, and corporate water withdrawals. And I think that, once again, you'd have to look at that overall corporate structure in terms of understanding what this initiative would have, what impact it would have on local governments or entities that they support. Reality, who's covered? Any activity the local community opposes. Community can define the activities allowed. This does not recognize property rights, mineral or water rights, and it distinguishes between individuals' rights and corporate rights. There's no reasonable accommodation structure built into this initiative. This, particularly in oil and gas or in the mineral entities, there is a recognition that if you have a divided surface and mineral estate, that the two mineral estate owners have to, or the mineral estate owner and the property owner estate has to accommodate each other so that both entities can fully maximize the development of their property or their minerals. this concept will go away under this kind of initiative. There's no recognition, particularly for the energy industry, that the proponents who might want to ban any activity, including energy development, there's no recognition in this initiative that the energy that they use, either to go and get signatures for collection or any of the materials that we use in our everyday lives, this completely divorces the idea that we have, all of us have some responsibility to understand where the sources of energy come from, to heat our homes, to light to provide power for our lighting. All of that isn't recognized in this initiative, and it's really a departure from reality. Why? Why are the proponents bringing this? Once again, I'm just citing exactly what they say on their website and in their video presentations. They really decry this concept of corporate power. They really deride the General Assembly and their inability to not just enact rules and regulations to govern any activity, but the General Assembly's inability or unwillingness to ban a certain activity. State and federal regulators, those rules and regulations that are enacted to cover our industry or any other industry, they're just simply dismissed as having been written by the industry at the acquiescence of the regulators, which we know is not true. And finally, local governments urge citizens to work within the system to minimize impacts. But local governments, they feel, don't have that power to ban a certain activity. And going back to one of my slides earlier, one of the things I hadn't considered, nor did the proponents articulate as a possible effect of this passage of this initiative, would be to ban a bookstore or maybe an undesirable kind of business out there, such as maybe pornography or any other controversial activity that they're not really thinking that that would have the effect of. But I think any corporate activity could be banned by a vote of the people. More analysis on this amendment. This is an attack on the concept of preemption, which is concepts that the Colorado courts have developed and implemented for many, many years and have provided kind of the rules of the road for state and local government to effectively regulate various industries in Colorado. It's an attack on the judicial branch. This completely eviscerates the ability of the courts to call the rules of, to call balls and strikes in terms of the way the laws are implemented in Colorado. All decision-making at the local level will be by a majority vote. Inalienable rights to enact any laws. This is an issue of corporate rights versus community rights in their mind. Does this allow the banning of any kind of business? And it really defines, there's probably going to be a question if this were to make it to the ballot and to pass, and that would be what rights does an individual have versus what a corporation has in terms of its rights. So I think that the initiative really provides a lot of questions, but I would urge you, for those of you who are watching this webinar, simply to go to the Community Rights Network website. They are, to their credit, incredibly transparent in terms of what their policy goals are. It was easy for me to put together my presentation just by reading and listening to their materials. And it would be very well worth your time, particularly to watch Cliff Wellming's presentation, which is about an hour long, but it covers the waterfront in terms of their overall objectives, and would urge you all to do that. Thank you.
Great, and thanks, Stan, for doing this. And it's important also that for our members to recognize that we have the same kinds of restrictions on Water Congress activities that other public entities have under the Fair Campaign Practices Act. And so we can't urge voters to do or not do anything. I think, interestingly, some of the oil and gas groups have, I don't know if you've seen around, the Think Before You Ink billboards. There's one on Hamden I went by. There's one on South Broadway, or two that I've seen. And I think that it's the first time I've seen this kind of approach of trying to get people, voters to pause for a moment before signing things. Because certainly it's been a very common story throughout decades of collecting signatures. When you start asking the petition gatherers signatures, they really can't answer the question. So hopefully it'll be interesting to see if that slows down the process. We certainly do have a very easy to amend Constitution, and it's been, Steve has been working with us at the Water Congress for 20 years now, Steve, I think, on dealing with public trust issues. We're, I think, on one hand, relatively pleased that we do not have any proposed direct public trust initiative that's going to be on the even out for signatures right now. There are some dozen different ideas out there right now for signatures, and one is this Initiative 40. We'll be talking about other initiatives as time goes by next month on especially Initiative 63. And there may be an initiative out there that we actually like on that raising the bar on Colorado's requirement for petition gathering, as well as the voting requirements should you want to amend the Constitution. And I appreciate Stan spending some time here on the Colorado Community Rights Network. It's important, I think, and a good idea to go look at their website and look at what they really mean by this community self-government. And they're certainly tying it into a whole variety of different things. If you go to their website, there is a link to a letter from the Birmingham jail from Martin Luther King back in 1963. And it's an example of how they're tying this into the idea of civil rights. A couple of years ago, there was a protest on the 16th Street Mall about the idea of the $15 minimum per hour minimum wage. And there was a group of probably 100 people there that were out carrying signs and so forth. And then at the back of that group, there was this banner of Colorado Community Rights Network. I thought, well, that's strange. I thought they were out for local self-government. And so I went and I asked one of the protesters there, I said, do you know who these Colorado Community Rights Network people are? And they said, no, we have no idea. They just kind of showed up. And so this idea is that they kind of go out and just kind of attach themselves to other ideas that are out there. As you look also on their website, and this court case that we talked about earlier, an interesting thing on their news section out there is saying that this is the first time in brief form that an argument for the right of local government has been advanced. I don't think that's really true, but this idea that the right of local self-government is guaranteed by the state and federal constitutions, and kind of taking the twisting of the law and to their purposes. And importantly, I think it said here, the brief is not necessarily aimed at the judge. Well, I thought that's who we wrote briefs for, Steve, was for the judge. But and it says it's not necessarily aimed at the judge; it's aimed at your people. And it's become, and this idea that they really are pushing. You need to read these briefs, and it has to become alive in the brains of people working on these issues. And that the idea really, and out of the whole lawsuit, is to energize people around this idea. We've certainly seen in the political process quite a bit of energizing of ideas around both the presidential campaign. I think as we're looking at what the Water Congress is doing, I think part of our first step is just to raise awareness, and we can certainly do that within the Fair Campaign Practices Act. But and as Stan referenced, just looking at the Colorado Community Rights Network website is a great starting point, and there's no doubt that they intend this as part of a movement and a civil, not civil unrest so much, but just a movement. A couple of years ago, when the previous version of this amendment was out for signatures, there was another group out there that's called Move to Amend that was carrying their ballot petitions, as well as the Green Party. And the Move to Amend thing, if you're not familiar with that, it's all tied to the Citizens United case and whether or not corporations are people. And the idea that they need it's a movement to amend the U.S. Constitution to explicitly overturn the Citizens United case. But all their public stuff is all about stopping corporate power. And when you look at, and you can follow this rabbit, you can follow this in a lot of different trails, I guess, depending on where you want to go with this. You can there are movements out there about what rights of nature are, and what does that mean? And in general, the rights of nature means that all life forms, from the viruses on to more complex life forms, have a right, an independent right to exist in all their life stages. So it's when you start delving into these issues, you find all kinds of connections to that, to the Move to Amend we talked about, the rights of nature. And certainly on their website, they're very clear, but this is all tied to a Pennsylvania group called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which is separate from, it has nothing to do with the Environmental Defense Fund. But it's coming out of the fight in Pennsylvania, this kind of anti-fracking fight out there. But it's also on their website is Tom Lindsay is their leader on this group, and he's got a pretty, I think, well done presentation on democracy and that we don't have democracy in this country. That they want this direct democracy where we can have mob rule, we can have the people voting on essentially everything that they feel is not in their interests. So in many ways, the impacts of this go way beyond the water community. Certainly, many of our ditch companies are corporations, right? They have abilities to operate and move through multiple jurisdictions in many cases. And the right for creating this right in our Constitution for a local government to just say, you know what, we don't like that ditch company anymore, or the ability for a local government to impose restrictions on how those ditch companies might operate is a very real thing. We don't know, and we spent time at the rehearing on this ballot initiative in front of the Colorado Ballot Title Board about whether or not are they intending to, how do they deal with government to government, and then at least made a statement on the record that this wasn't supposed to regulate one government's activity, because governments all the time do business in other communities. Certainly, ditch companies will pass through multiple jurisdictions. Water delivery systems do, water storage, and they were pretty clear that well, we don't think this should apply. But that's not what the letter of the law says, and we were just going after big corporations. But that's not really what this initiative says, and it's important to know that. It's the bumper sticker mentality that's out there that is really a concern of, well, shouldn't all government be able to ban any bad activity within their jurisdiction, anything they don't like, and it gets into a lot of complexity with what the preemption doctrine is. I really wasn't familiar with that until a few years ago. What is that? But I think there's reasons for that. We don't want to have one community spring up and say, well, we think we'd like to have the metric system be on all of our signs, so you have a different speed limit. Now you're not having to do that calculation in your head. So there are these kinds of things where we need to have a statewide law and a statewide system for that. But that's not the same thing as banning a liquor store from your neighborhood or that type of thing. So it's a much different thing. What we've been doing for the last 20 years is fighting and actively challenging anything related to public trust. And in 2013, we actually created something we initially called the Public Trust Special Project, which we've now changed the title that to the our Colorado Water Stewardship Project, recognizing that there are going to be issues out there that maybe aren't directly state public trust, and we've got 2 of them here in front of us now. So we've been through our special project, and this will be our commercial message for it. We are actively out soliciting funds for this project. We've been funding this at roughly around $150,000. Our work for the last several years on this. And so we're in the middle of doing a fundraiser for our activities that will carry us between now and the remainder of the election cycle anyway. A lot of that work has gone to fund Steve's time on here. And in front of the Colorado Ballot Title Board, that work has gone towards working with them once, if we lose the argument, which is not atypical, on whether or not it's a single subject, the next step for that Ballot Title Board is to set and work on the language on the actual question that would appear on the ballot. And that's enormously important to understand what that question says, and then also to get on the record what the ballot proponents intend. And that's really been a benefit for us, whether or not we win the single subject argument. So a lot of our work has been gone into tracking some 158 initiatives that have been introduced this current cycle, and keeping an awareness of where they are in addition to participating in the legal actions. And their important work that Steve does as part of this project is to help us make sure that because we have funds, that we have to stay on the right side of that bright line about what we can and cannot do under the Fair Campaign Practices Act, and that anyone contributing, because most of, I think 90+% of our funding for our special project is coming from public entities. So that they need to know and be clearly aware that anything that we do is on the right side of that, the law. The other thing that I have to compliment our attorneys on, and as I was going around the state the last couple of years talking about the public trust, is the fantastic job that our attorneys have done out there on keeping local governments and city councils and town councils informed on what these public trust kinds of things could do to their jurisdiction. A year ago, I was talking to the Uray Town Council, and they were council totally conversant on the issue. I was really surprised, and so I think as we move around the state, this raising awareness of things that may sound good in the public, that they have far-reaching impacts. And certainly, at least on the surface, this right to local self-government really isn't intended to go after the water community. Their poster child is oil and gas, but it goes way beyond that and affects all levels of business. So what our first area here is the legal. It's my time and our co-project manager is Floyd Cerulli. It's his time on speaking about these things in various public forums and raising that awareness. You may recall Floyd did a poll for us back in 2013 on these public trust issues and try to gauge what the public's reaction to that was. And I think he found that initially people are kind of drawn to that concept of, well, water is a public resource. Water should be. Why isn't that? Why does public trust not apply to that? And I think as you go through that education process, or just even say, okay, do you realize that this would mean that? It's like, oh. And it's fairly easy to move the needle when people are given the facts and given more depth of information. But getting that out is an expensive and time-consuming process to do that. But as part of our project, Floyd is currently designing another poll that will be, we expect to be out in the field in late June or after 4th of July. We haven't yet decided yet. So somewhere in that roughly 2-week window, we'll be out in the field with that poll asking about this very initiative, the right to local self-government. Also, a companion initiative out there, which we'll talk about later, which is this right to a healthy environment. But also to try to get a feel for that, how does the public's awareness on the Colorado's water plan and our existing system and process that we have in place that's here to make sure we have an orderly way of doing things rather than this kind of mob rule that's been proposing these things. So Floyd will be out, I said, with this polling, and he's designing those questions right now. One of the things that we found prior to this in the 2013 poll was a strong trust that people have in their local governments, especially their water providers. There's a very high level of confidence. Since then, we've had a situation with Flint and other types of situations like that have sprung up, and so it'll be interesting to gauge if there's any change or shift in public attitude related to all the press that the Flint situation got. Once the poll is done, our next step is to help shape the messaging and the kinds of things that we would want to say that we think would resonate with the voters. Floyd's next step will be in later July and early August, will be to conduct focus groups to help understand, based on the polling, what messages help resonate, at least on the water side, from that. The other activity that we have going on is developing partnerships with the people that are, such as the oil and gas industry, that will be affected by this, such as our business community, our metro chamber, et cetera, Colorado Municipal League, and those entities that are out there, and working on those partnerships and working to simply get that message out through their channels that they regularly use to communicate their newsletters and so forth. And it's kind of a grass tops kind of thing more than a grassroots kind of thing, or a thing that we have. So the idea there is to kind of get the messaging out on what we think would resonate with the voters. And so a lot of money that we have in our project would go towards developing those communications materials and writing those kind of op-ed pieces that we think. So that is where we're headed with the project, and we're looking at our continuing our fundraising for this, and we're hoping that we can get folks energized on doing this. Again, everything that we do will stay within the Fair Campaign Practices Act. We cannot get out and urge voters to do or not do anything. We can raise awareness of those things, of what these initiatives are out there, and that's really what our goal is. And that's really the limits of it. To get out and do an active ballot campaign, that's going to have to all go to the private sector to fund and finance that, and to implement those programs. So that's where we are with that. And with that, Emily, I think we're ready to do some questions, perhaps.
That was great. Thank you. We have a couple of questions. The first question comes from Peggy Montano. What is the scope of local government, and does it include special districts?
Peggy, that was one of the questions that came up at the review and comment hearing on an earlier version of Initiative 40. The question is, what is the scope of local governments covered by Initiative 40, and does it include special districts? And it's specifically defined to include both counties and municipalities, whether home rule or otherwise. It does not include special districts by its terms.
Great. And then I have another question. In light of the Zika virus moving into the United States, how would the rights of nature interface with this amendment if approved?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, if you read the letter of what these rights of nature groups want to do, it's like, well, why doesn't the Zika virus have a right to exist? It's natural. It's out there in the environment, and certainly gets in everything from that all the way up through mosquito control to control of invasive weed species, and versus what's native, what's not native. It could get into very important things to us, which are on the Colorado River example. The Colorado River, the 4 species endangered fish there. We do a lot on control, and non-native fish control is a big issue there. So how would that play out? So it would be one of these examples of how far-reaching these things are, and different ways that this could affect our life, and everything from a virus to polio vaccines to much bigger issues.
So let me just reiterate that rights of nature are not defined in this initiative. They're not defined otherwise in the Colorado Constitution. Local communities under this initiative would be given the power to recognize or establish rights of nature, and I think that gives each local community quite a bit of latitude in defining rights of nature for itself.
And Steve, almost without question, the local community could do certain things in what it does, but the ability for its citizens or other citizens to challenge whatever they say is the rights of nature, in some ways that may, and when it seems like whenever we are asking questions from the title board, it's, oh, well, yes, that isn't defined in here. We expect the courts to define that, and that will have to be defined on a case-by-case basis, which will be an ever-evolving thing as people challenge their particular ideas of what the rights of nature really are.
I think there's one other element to this is if a local community or the state or the federal government, comes up with the way to deal with the Zika virus, whether it's some vaccination or whether it's some way of dealing with it, I suspect the local community could outright ban that particular vaccination or that treatment. Not so much treatment, but if say there's a group of citizens who don't want to have that particular product in their community, this might be an opportunity to challenge that local government, say a county health department's administration of that application.
Very interesting. Thank you. At this time, I don't see any more questions. If you're wanting to ask a question, there is a questions pane on the lower left-hand side of your GoToWebinar toolbar, where you may email me, ebrummett@cowatercongress.org. And
while we're waiting for other questions, the oil and gas folks have really gotten out in front of this through the study fracking kind of thing. And what can you tell us about how that got started and how it's funded and goals of it and so forth? And they've been active, everything from being at a Rockies game to on KOA and everything. So.
Well, and that's the organization known as Coloradans for Responsible Energy Development, which two companies really initiated, and they've built support for it within a broad range of the industry. Noble Energy and Anadarko are to be given the credit for the incredibly hard work and the infrastructure they've built. It really began as an educational project to inform Coloradans about what fracking is, what fracking isn't, what rules and regulations have been developed to address those activities, but also to promote the industry's involvement in the state of Colorado generally, the contribution the industry offers to local governments and local communities. So it covers the waterfront in terms of educating Coloradoans about the industry and our participation in Colorado. And then a separate organization is Protect Colorado, which will be really the organization that will be funded to oppose ballot initiatives or even support ballot initiatives. And I can't necessarily speak for CRED or Protect Colorado, but they've built a very strong organization. There will be possibly other entities that form opposition campaigns as well. But I think that the industry has studied Colorado a great deal to try to understand what the issues are, how to communicate with those, our industry responses to those issues. And I think that the folks at CRED, Coloradans for Responsible Energy Development, have done fantastic work in terms of promoting their views and bringing Colorado closer to the industry.
How do you feel it's been effective, or has there been any? I should know the answer to this question before I ask, I guess. But has there been any kind of feedback on?
I think the reaction's been good. I see it in a couple of ways. for me, and I typically end up answering a lot of media questions on all aspects of the industry, including why are gasoline prices high or low. And the fact is, most reporters understand without me telling them that Colorado's economy is tied to the oil and gas industry. And when Colorado is at a time when we have low gas prices, which we all like, that may have a different effect on Colorado's economic health and the generation of severance tax because it reflects a low crude oil price. So I think that the work that CRED and other organizations have done really has permeated conversation in Colorado by average citizens. I think people are seeing these ads. I'll also give credit to my colleagues at the American Petroleum Institute and Energy for Shale efforts. So there's been several industry efforts, and I think they've worked very well together. And I think it has changed the conversation in Colorado. I'm not so concerned about what the proponents of Amendment 40 are saying, and I'm not so concerned about what our most active supporters are saying. I'm really listening for what the people of Colorado are saying and the kinds of questions they ask, and frankly, what they themselves generate in their own thinking in the statements that they make. So I think all of the industry's efforts have been very helpful, and I think we continually need to understand what emerging issues are out there that people have questions about, but I've been very pleased with that.
I think it's just such a dynamic environment where we're at right now with certainly at the political campaigns. There's a lot of voter frustration. There's a lot of distrust, obviously, from U.S. Congress and how far that goes. And now there's potentially some distrust with local government, even with some of the plant types of things springing up. And trying to understand, and especially here in Colorado, especially in the Denver metro area, about the tremendous number of new people that are coming in. They can't even find housing, and they're coming into the state and without really a lot of background on Colorado way of life, if you want to call it that, or the ethics of Colorado, and trying to understand and keep an idea on what messages resonate with them. Is just a
I agree. I think that
challenge.
The wonderful economy we have in the Denver metro area is still contrasted to a very rough economy in rural Colorado. And I know that, working with the Water Congress, you see that every day in terms of your water providers and water users and constituents. So, it is a bit of a challenge to match up all of the aspects of Colorado. And, I think that in my presentation I mentioned I think the responsibility that all of us as citizens have in terms of understanding that we use energy every day, whether from the point we turn on the lights in the morning, we take a hot shower, we get in our cars, we use petroleum products, and those are the obvious cases, but it's not so obvious that the clothes we wear, the materials that we use in our job every day, whether you're an office worker or you're out there using your hands to construct something positive for society, it's all generated from fossil fuels and oil and gas in particular. We as an industry and as a society need to do as much as we can to make sure that folks understand that we're all tied together, and it's easy to say Colorado generates this amount of severance tax, but it's much more than that. Our entire economy is dependent on the responsible development of fossil fuels.
Certainly is on that broad scale, and also just directly into the water community. You've got certainly the severance tax that's collected, the portion that's going back directly into local communities. Yep. That's doing roads and bridges and other infrastructure, which we all like. But also, as we kind of think about where does that severance tax go, it's coming into a separately funded separate fund that exists within our state budget. Now and then it gets rated to help balance the budget, but generally it doesn't. And about half of that revenue is coming into the Department of Natural Resources. Half of that, half a quarter, is going over the perpetual base account. under the Colorado Water Conservation Board, so which is funding a large number of water projects. The other part that's going over to DNR, the other quarter of that, is going to certainly fund state agencies, but it's also going to the Water Supply Reserve account. It's going into the Species Conservation Trust Fund. So it's going to fund those activities that really are directly important to the water community. In addition to money that's over on the other half that's going to the Department of Local Affairs. So half coming over to DNR, half going over to Department of Local Affairs, and quite a bit of that money is going to help fund treated water infrastructure and wastewater. So that otherwise the communities would not be able to afford, or it would be have a huge impact on their customers to be able to get that infrastructure. So their water infrastructure is modern and compliant. And we've got a big enough problem coming right now with that. So that direct tie of severance tax, if that went away, we're now going to have to find other ways of funding water. And I think it's important.
And I mean, Doug, that's the best description of the way severance tax is allocated that I've heard. So congratulations. You have specific examples of where those funds flow that are important to your organization. You know, the problem is severance tax is down 75%. And it's all because of the value of the commodity that we're developing. That's part of the way severance tax is derived, is how you value it. And you know, the last year and a half, 2 years, we've just had a crushing blow in terms of the commodity price. On the other hand, that obviously leads to lower gas prices that we all benefit from, and that's helping fuel the economy in another way. So there's if we ever find the perfect moment in terms of avoiding price volatility, but that, once again, that's outside the purview of my association. But we appreciate the partnerships we have with the water community and you know, the communities we support with the severance tax and the direct economic contributions that are made in those areas. So we have a lot of work to do going forward to make sure severance tax is appropriated in the appropriate ways that it was designed to, as well as support the local governments that are funded with other taxes.
Another example of a tie between water and energy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions pop up on your screen there? Or?
No more questions have come in, but I think that means you've done a fabulous job of explaining.
Is anyone still online?
Yeah, everyone's still online. Yeah. So I want to say thank you, Doug, Steve, Stan, for being here today and for helping our members better understand not only this initiative, but the ways that it will impact the water community, oil and gas, and local governments as a whole.
So we have another webinar coming up, but we haven't set the date yet for it.
We have another webinar coming up, likely in the next month and a half. It will be on initiative number 63, the right to a healthy environment. And I will begin advertising for that likely in the next week or two, so look out for that. And we hope that you'll join us again. Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.